Welcome. This week we're diving into the topic of risk. And for this video, I want to focus in on a few topics that I think are really important to understand when we're, the thinking about risk. We know our top priority is the health and the safety of the children that we're caring for. And so we have a few things to consider is licensing regulations, liability, and supervision. And so this is just a little I feel like just a little little bit of information to get you started in thinking about these things. But those of you who have been working in the field, this is probably mostly a recap, things that you already know. But for those of you who are really new and haven't worked in a program before, this might be some new information for you. So, critical components of ensuring the safety of children. First off, if we're working in a program that's considered having regulated care, that could be a child care center, it could be a family child program, a family home program, it could be an after school program. But each of those programs, the majority of you are here in Vermont, and I feel like hopefully this is something that you've already learned in other courses, but it's really important to understand that the child care licensing regulations are something that we have to follow. So this yellow book is specific for child care licensing regulations for center-based child care and preschool programs. So if you're working in a center, this is the set of regulations that you are required to follow. When you are working in a program, when you first get hired, one of the things that you have to do is read the regulations and sign something that shows that attests that you have read the regulations and you understand it. This is really important to understand your role. So as an employee, you are required to know the regulations, sign something that says you've read those, and that you continue to follow them. And what can happen sometimes is there can be this real feeling of animosity, or like the child care licensing regulator, the licensor who's visiting programs, who does site visits, kind of becomes like the big bad wolf. And staff members can become very worried about the licensor. But I think I encourage my students to understand that they have a really important role in protecting the health and safety of children. And so they're coming to visit programs to make sure that these guidelines are being implemented. And when they're not being implemented, it might be that it is just a talking point because something minor isn't being addressed, or it might be a violation, something that is in here is not being followed in closely enough, or isn't being followed at all. And so you can get a violation. And sometimes those violations are minor things, and sometimes they're very severe things. And so it's important, if this is new to you, to make sure that you ask questions when you get hired, and that you understand what the regulations are that you are required to follow. I think that some of the questions that came up in some other discussion forums, and also in some of the written reflections that I've been reading of my students, is really asking questions about like liability, and how does that look different in a nature-based program? Well, first off, we still have to follow these guidelines, and so it's important that we really understand that. And these guidelines also have another document called the guidance manual, and this answers some other questions that might not be clear in the regulations. You've got this document and you have this document. And then within the guidance manual, there are other resources that are linked in here. So for example, when we're talking about our outdoor classrooms and developing outdoor safe spaces, the outdoor environment in the guidance manual talks about making sure, or using this as a reference document. So all of that to say that we need to understand that we still have important, that we have to follow those in our nature-based programs. And it's important to kind of know too, as an employee, when you have questions, who's your supervisor? Who do you ask questions to? If you feel like something isn't either being followed, or maybe something, a practice that you're doing, you have questions about it based on those regulations, I think it's really important that you have that open communication. Now, for those of you considering opening your own programs and being a business owner, then there's lots more for you to learn, because then you become the person who is responsible not only for the licensing regulations, but for, really understanding how to maintain safety and supervision of children. And so in nature-based programs, especially if we're going off-site and we're out beyond in the beyond area, it can be a continual challenge to make sure that teachers are overseeing those larger groups and being safe. So this week, in our assignment for our written reflection is creating a benefit risk assessment. So you're picking one activity and looking at that and going through the protocol that's listed there, and both the textbook, and then there's another article that you'll read, helps you look at a benefit risk assessment. And so that is a tool that you would use with your team. So if you're in, if you have a co-teacher or you're working in a childcare center with multiple staff members, doing those benefit risk assessments helps you to decide, is this an activity that the benefits outweigh the risks? And so depending on the age group of the children, depending on your familiarity with the children, it might be a yes or it might be a no, but the benefit risk assessments is a really great tool. So I'm excited that you're going to work on that as an assignment this week. I wrote in the notes, it can feel hard. Many of you probably have never done one of these before, so I just want you to do your best, and I think, try it out and see how it goes. But those of you who are considering becoming a business owner, either opening your own family home program or opening a center, you really do want to make sure that you have studied and become really prepared and you're ready to implement, a safe program. And so the licensing regulations have really clear guidelines for things about safety, guidelines about child adult ratios, and lots of other guidelines. And so I think it's really important that that's something that you study and that you take the time to really learn about that. There are, legal requirements that programs have, both with, having liability insurance is a legal requirement for organizations that work with kids. And so if you don't have, if you fail to have that adequate coverage, then there can be legal consequences to it and financial burdens, upon you as an individual or upon the organization. So learning about liability insurance, basically you probably are familiar with insurance in the context of having car insurance, or if you're a homeowner, having homeowners insurance, or if you rent, maybe having renters insurance. Well, liability coverage is something that is required for programs that are working with children in case accidents or injuries or property damage happen. And you the person who owns the business is responsible for understanding the liability insurance and understanding what needs to be covered. So typically it's things like legal costs, medical expenses, compensation claims. And so we're not diving very deep into that, but it's this module of risk. It just felt like we should have a little bit of conversation about that. And so I definitely encourage you to understand that there's lots more to learn about that. When you do get your insurance coverage, oftentimes the insurance representative will come and look at your physical space. They may do their own type of risk assessments to identify potential hazards, and they'll look to see that you have safety protocols in place, and they want to ensure that your program is safe and that you have a plan to mitigate risks and prevent accidents. And then policies, this is an expense. Having insurance policies is a cost to the program, but it's something that you want to make sure that you have adequate coverage, because if something were to happen, if a if a child or other staff member became injured, you would want to be sure that you had your, the right type of insurance. And then the third thing, so we've talked about licensing, we talked a little bit about liability insurance. The third thing is really comes down to diligent supervision. So, when we think about our role in caring for children, we know that we have to have age appropriate ratios. So, those of you who are more familiar in working in after school settings, the ratio that you have in an after school setting, it might be as high as 1 to 15 or 1 adult to 20 children. And when we think about that adult to child ratio, it's really important to understand what kinds of activities you're able to do. And so with preschool age children, the ratio for center-based is 1 to 10. But when I take children off site and I'm going to the beyond, going to the forest classroom, I really prefer to have a ratio that exceeds that we have a smaller number of children to one adult. So I would prefer to have something like a 1 to 6 ratio so that I feel really comfortable that I can adequately supervise and support the children. So age or the ratios are based on the age of the children, but it's also based on the activities that you're doing. So licensing regulations offer a ratio for us, but there are times, when we might be doing some things like that we need more adults. And so that, exceeding the regulatory requirements, meaning exceeding it in the sense that we have more adults than it says that we have to, can often make it feel safer. The other thing to think about is you want staff who are qualified. You want staff members who are well trained, who are experienced, who have knowledge both about the type of program that you're offering, but understanding child development and understanding developmentally appropriate practices, and that they understand safety protocols and that they can implement the things that they've been taught. And so always before we hire new staff, we in regulated programs, we're required to do background checks and fingerprinting. And it's very important that we have screening processes to make sure that the adults that are working with children are qualified and that they're safe. And then within our programs, we should have safety protocols beyond what's in the licensing regulations, having our safety protocols that are really clear and comprehensive about what do we do if an injury occurred when we're in the forest? What do we do? Who administers first aid, or how do we handle situations? Staff members in regulated care are required to be CPR and first aid certified, but you can have someone who's been certified and doesn't feel comfortable, doesn't have the skills to actually implement it. So making sure that you have those safety protocols in place are really important, and that staff are both trained in this and that there's a regular ongoing process to make sure that what we're doing is safe. And so having routines like playground safety checks, having a staff member go out to make sure that the space that we're going to is safe. If we're walking off site, that we have a way that we're checking to make sure that space is safe. Especially when we're thinking about shared areas where the community members have access to spaces as well. We don't know, what a community member was doing there last night, and if they left something behind, whether it's broken glass or, a needle or some other drug paraphernalia. Like we want to have systems in place that we're checking on those things. And so, that constant vigilance that we are continually, we're attentive, that we're tuned into the children, that we're actively monitoring children's activities is really important. And so, having protocols in place where, staff members aren't on their cell phone and just checked out and, scrolling on their screen, but that they're there and they're, a positive influence. They're ready to address any conflicts that come up, and they're able to support children in a developmentally appropriate way. And so this is why when we hire new staff, we have to have some sort of onboarding sequence for them. There are minimum requirements of first aid and CPR, having an orientation training, having a minimum staff professional development each year. Those things are in the licensing regulations for regulated programs. But sometimes you may be in a program that is a summer camp, and the regulations look different for summer camps than they do for childcare. But we want to make sure that we have those safety protocols in place. If you're ever hired somewhere and you're working somewhere and you feel like something isn't safe, or something feels off to you, or you have questions, or you feel worried about something, it's really your responsibility to talk to your supervisor, because that does happen sometimes. I have students reach out to me sometimes who are very surprised in what they had read about in their textbook and what they're seeing in practice in their real jobs, and there feels like a disconnect. And so we certainly want to make sure that children are safe, and that we understand what our role is. And we, working with young children, we are considered mandated reporters. And so if we see something that feels like, that we have questions about, or we feel like needs to be reported, there is another staff training that you're required to do called mandated reporter that will teach you a lot more about that. But I think it's really important. So this chat feels like a doom and gloom, and that wasn't my intent, but rather to really think about, we have these important responsibilities to protect children's health and their safety. And so we need to do our due diligence to understand the regulations, to understand the protocols. Hopefully your program would have a staff handbook so that you can, there's written policies for you to be able to understand what you follow. And when you feel like something's off or something needs to be revisited, the staff handbook and the protocols that you have in place should be something that's a living document that you continue to go back to and revisit and consider, do changes need to be made? And so I encourage you to talk with your supervisor and ask questions. So this week's module on risk, I hope that you enjoy it. There's good readings, both from our textbook and the Tim Gill article, which I think will do a good job in helping you become familiar with benefit risk assessments. There feels like a really long list of things to do this week, but I think the videos, the majority of them are very short. I wanted to include those so that you got to have a little glimpse into other programs and see what it looks like. And likely you'll see things in the video that you're like, oh, I don't know if I would feel comfortable to do that. One of the videos has a pretty young child using a knife and doing some whittling, and that may be something that you haven't seen in a program before. So I encourage you to enjoy those videos. A couple of them are from Scandinavia, and so it's nice to kind of see in different parts of the world, what are they doing? How do their programs look different? One of the videos includes napping outdoors and thinking about, how would that work, and what are the benefits of napping outdoors? There's a Swedish video as well, and there's examples of how they use a red string to kind of show the fire safety ring, and then they talk. It's translated into English, but the children are speaking in Swedish. I guess Swedish is the language, but they're cooking outdoors and doing some fun activities, and it'd be interesting to see what you feel like, what would feel like comfortable risks for you. There's some of the kids are doing like a teeter-totter on a downed tree and climbing up a branch, and so really thinking about how does that feel, how does that feel comfortable for you? And I think that whole conversation about balancing risk and benefits, it's an ongoing thing. And what feels comfortable for you now, you may feel more comfortable with it in the future. And so this can be kind of an ongoing conversation. So I hope you enjoy this week on risk in nature-based learning. As always, if you have questions, feel free to reach out via email or be active in the discussion forum, and we'll chat more soon. Thanks.